Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for taking the time to come out. I was in this space where we're sitting, I think it was about 7 years ago, before it became officially the branch headquarters for the Melbourne group. And for those of you who don't know, this space did not always look like this. It was walking through here 7 years ago, I think with Edward and a group of us were here. And they were pointing, saying, this will be, the bookstore will be here, the library will be here. It was an exercise of the imagination to be able to visualize what it has come to be now. And so it's a wonderful thing, an example of the possibilities that we have when we can actually learn to work together with any one thing. So anyway, I'm happy to be here again and to have a chance to talk with you all about something that minimally is meaningful to me. Hopefully that's something that may convey also as we go along. Just to say what it is I'm going to be talking about, the 5 seeds as something that has been presented to the world through the means of this Theosophical Society, the ageless wisdom tradition. Probably I'm going to be talking about it. We'll be talking about seeds, certainly, but seeds of a different type, of course. Not the specific seeds we put in the ground, but seeds that are perhaps planted in the consciousness of humanity in particular will be the focus. Might not be a bad idea to start off just with a shared idea of what we mean when we talk about what is a seed, since this is going to be the subject that we're going to be going into. So when we think of a seed and ask ourselves, what is it? I think pretty clearly all of us have some sort of sense of what that is. I mean, if you had breakfast this morning, I did, and there were pumpkin seeds and there were sesame seeds in this muesli that I had. But we all know a seed is, in its appearance, it has various appearances, but it's something that by its nature, it is the fully developed plant or entity in its embryonic state, is what a seed is. The seed contains the entire blueprint for whatever the life form is that's going to follow. And so that's the nature of a seed. It doesn't bear any resemblance to the thing that it will grow into, never does. A seed might look like a little rock and turn out to be a mighty tree. There's just a lot of things. But it starts off as this small rock-like thing, and it's planted in the ground. And so another aspect of seed and its development is that it's something that necessarily, it grows in the dark. Once it's planted, the processes that are going on, the way in which it unfolds, the way in which it expands, takes place unseen initially. And so it takes place in this unseen manner, but it's also something that requires proper conditions in order for it to come into its fullness. So, a seed which contains a life, planted in soil which is inappropriate for growth, or lacking in the other things of moisture and attention that it requires, sunlight, nothing happens. Life's there, but nothing happens. I mean, this is part of the, the ageless wisdom traditions around the world. Most of the ones we're familiar with had their beginnings many years ago. Whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, they have their roots that go back to a time when we were on an agriculturally intelligent planet. The world was rural, so everybody could get what was meant by a seed and by the process of cultivating the seed, because it requires proper conditions. So you find in the religious traditions of the world, they're always referring back to processes that might relate to agriculture or animal husbandry. In the Bible, they talk about the depiction of Jesus or the Lord as the shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, which is an idea that I think would be lost. Maybe not in Australia, where you're such a sheep herding country. Other places in the world, you say shepherd, and they would probably Google it now. Encyclopedia is not a thing it's a thing of the past. But shepherd. But you had the idea in one of the parables of Jesus in the Bible about the seed and the soil, the nature of the ground on which it finds itself. And the idea was that a seed thrown onto rocky soil, what happens? I mean, we know, nothing. There's no opportunity for it to grow. There are no conditions for that. Then they gave the example of a seed that's thrown into the weeds, and it's choked out by the other life forms that are struggling there and competing. But a seed that's planted in proper soil was the example that was given in the biblical text. And what is it that happens from that? There is this possibility for it to grow upward, to it to move toward the light, that sort of thing that we associate with a spiritual unfoldment. So there is this aspect of a seed as well. It requires appropriate conditions in order to fully express itself. And this is kind of where it comes into the idea as an analogy for our spiritual life, our spiritual growth, that there is the possibility for all of us, and actually it becomes down to an actual need and requirement for all of us to take charge in producing the proper conditions. And, it's one of these things that is quite important, and becoming the importance of our role in unfoldment, even at the level of genetics, is something that has become something of common knowledge almost. There's a whole field that has grown up, epigenetics. There's genetics, then there's epigenetics, which talks about those factors on top of genetics, those factors in addition to genetics that express how this life unfolds. And one of the things that's being, the various experiments that are being done indicate that, there is a biological process involved in the expression of the various genes in our system, the things that give you the color of your eyes or the illnesses that you are predisposed to. There is a role in terms of the thoughts that we think, where they have an effect on the nature, on turning on or turning off potentialities within the cells in the body. This is something it's another one of these things in a way. My daughter, I used to always talk to her about different things. When you're raising a child, you talk to them about the benefits of different things. Not just about meditation, but the food you eat. It's good to eat leafy green vegetables. She didn't particularly like leafy green vegetables, but it's good to eat them. Here they are, they're on your plate, Angelique. Try and do something with it. And, she'd fight her way through the leafy greens. There comes a time where, she's describing to me, a little bit later in life, she says, Dad, you need to be aware that leafy green vegetables are an important part of our diet. And I said, well, wait a minute. I was clever enough to shut up. And I said, well, how do you know that? Well, scientists have proven. And it's like, okay, I accept it. I used to tell her sometimes you have to have that man in that white coat to tell you the things that mom and dad have been telling you all along to have it confirmed. And similarly, I think for us, there are certain things that we can say are, this is common knowledge. common knowledge in the sense that it's a knowledge that comes to us from history, from ancestors, from observation, that our thoughts are creative and effective in terms of our own lives. I mean, one of these popular sayings is that at 14, you have the face that God gave you. At 40, you have the face that you gave yourself. During those intervening years, we've made choices. And those choices have, they show up. And, some people are just looking, you don't seem to age. It's genetics, of course. My mom is 105 years old. She's doing yoga. So I have great hope for longevity. But there's also the factor of how we use that time in terms of bringing things into effect. So our role in this is to take some sorts of choices to create the conditions for the internal aspect. For those who are involved in a spiritual path, we would talk about the fact of the soul's presence, the presence of this spiritual entity that accompanies the body into the world at the time of birth, for it to have some sort of greater expression. In many ways, a way that you could describe the spiritual life is the life of removing the obstacles to the soul's expression. If you ever become convinced of the idea that there is such a thing as a spiritual component to your being, a soul, or there are many other words that could be used, but that's a familiar one. Once you become familiar with that, then the role for many becomes, how is it that I can create conditions for it to have a greater expression? The people we describe as spiritual beings, the Gandhis, the Mother Teresas, the Dalai Lamas of the world, well, those are people who made it their life's purpose and life's practice to create those conditions. And those conditions, if I had to describe the arithmetic of spirit, of the spiritual life or the spiritual path, many people think of it in terms of addition. So it's like the arithmetic that involves the flowering of the soul involves adding something that somehow has been missing to my being. So how do I do that? They're having a talk at the Theosophical Society today. Let me go and check it out. And maybe there, I'll get a piece. Someplace else, I get a piece. And that's one way of looking at it. And it's helpful because obviously knowledge is helpful. Knowledge is power, is the way we have been brought up. And, you say something like that in front of people and they tend to nod their heads, yes, yes, because we know that it is true. But it is power within the realm of that knowledge and not beyond. So there is a knowledge about how to meditate, for instance. And that's powerful because otherwise you're just sitting there not knowing what to do next, just spinning your wheels and think. But that knowledge is not meditation. So it can take us to a point, but then in order for it to become something active, spiritually speaking, it has to exceed mere knowledge. Then we start talking about wisdom and the ageless wisdom. So this is just kind of just introductory to talking about these 5 seeds. Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 in New York City. And it was an organization that came into being really with a very specific kind of focus. At the time that it came into being, it was something where There's a letter within the Theosophical tradition called the Mahachohan's letter. Very important piece of writing that describes the function and the value of this Theosophical Society and its work and the need for it at that time, late 1800s. And the idea was that there were two main currents in human thought that were dividing the human family into two kind of opposing, but also it would be non-productive ends for the human family. One of them was described as brutal materialism, which was based in the science of the time. You could say based in, not in science, but in the limitations that the scientific community places upon itself. So brutal materialism, the idea that the human life could all be defined within this band of scientific knowledge and study. That anything that exceeded that didn't speak about reality, but talked about some sort of dream. That reality consisted in the scientific view of the world. It creates problems, because when you start thinking about what is it that, the main feature of my being, which would be consciousness, even in the scientific experience, consciousness is the primary element that goes into any, but consciousness cannot be encompassed within the scientific view. The effects of consciousness can be described. You have a thought, they can measure the chemical responses and the electrical responses within the body, but what is the thinker lies outside that realm. And so there was this brutalizing material aspect that was taking effect with the human community. The other one would be what was described as degrading superstition. And so superstition in this case was the kind of a concept that was put forward and is put forward in the religions of the world, where you find formulaic approaches to the search for the divine. Then you often find that there are certain rules that are imposed upon those who follow that avenue. So, one of the main things is, if you're going to go this way, you have to come through the priest or the guru or the head of that particular line. That your connection to the divine depends on, proper performance of the rituals or the observances of a particular line. So these were these two trends: brutal materialism, degrading superstition. Theosophical Society came in order to present a third way. The idea that there is an ageless wisdom tradition that has been in existence always, and that this wisdom tradition can give certain guidelines and can plant certain seeds in the soil of human consciousness as a whole that can lead to more holistic, more wholesome outcomes if embraced. And that was the avenue that was for the Theosophical Society. So there are 5 main seeds that I'm going to talk about. Probably all of you know that, those of you associated with the Theosophical Society will know that there is this idea of the importance of the number 7. And that, 7 planes of consciousness, 7 subdivisions. 7's an important number. And I have to tell you, in my thinking about this subject of these seeds, I did try to make it come out to 7. I recognize I'm sharing with an audience of Theosophists, and I didn't want to be badly judged for not hitting the proper number. But I have to apologize. Maybe it's that I ran out of fingers, I don't know. But 5 seeds. Very important ideas that can begin as an idea and if really properly embraced and understood, actually lead toward an experience. So the first of these ideas, first of these seeds, is the seed of multi-dimensionality. Each one of us function on many different levels. We're multi-dimensional beings. And that's something that's not foreign to us, doesn't require an association with Theosophy or Buddhism or anything else. You go to the bookstore up here, the category, it would be described as body, mind, and spirit. You know, those are the books that you read. Body, mind, spirit, and the interrelationship of these three dimensions, broad dimensions of our being. So in the Theosophical tradition, the idea was that this is a very important thing to grasp, that at every moment we are functioning on many different levels. You know, the physical is the one we're most familiar with. But you know, I sometimes use the example, many people, if you are looking at another person, you know, if you get a little quiet, for some people it's just completely normal. When you look, you know, for many, there's an apparent kind of whitish, grayish band of, a little bit lighted band that you'll see around people. This is described as the etheric field, and it's something that for many, particularly in the healing fields, they think of it as the health aura, they might describe it as. And that's something that's very normal for people to perceive with each other. And so there's this health aura, which is an energetic field. It's said to be the one that is responsible for the filtering of the chi or the prana or the energetic component into the body and its circulation. When it's circulating properly, then we're in a condition of health, stability. When it's not, you know, oftentimes interruptions in that flow are visible to people who have that type of seeing, which is not uncommon at all. Other ways, you know, when we talk in terms of the human aura, that's something that is a reality to people who have certain degree of psychic or clairvoyant ability. Oftentimes it's something that is occasionally visible to, you know, the yous and the me's of the world. But there is this idea that there is an emotional field, and within the field of emotions, there are these coursing vibrations that go through, producing colors in our aura. Everybody also is aware of the power of thought. I mean, we think. And, you know, one of the great offerings from this Theosophical tradition is a little book that you'll find in the library here or in the bookstore called Thought Forms. If you're not familiar with it, you should be. Because if you have any sort of attraction to or awareness of Western modern art, that book and the paintings of the thought forms have had a profound influence on the development of modern Western art. No less than Kandinsky himself wrote a book on the spiritual in art directly referencing this. You know, it moved the artists of the time and of our time to try to depict the unseen, to try and bring the colors of an unseen realm and the forms related to thoughts that we create as paintings, as works of art. So that's something we think. And there's the idea, there's a little book that if you ever have a chance, I think you can even get it online for free. So there's a book called As a Man Thinketh by a fellow by the name of James Allen. I think because of the emphasis on masculine language, it's also been translated as a woman thinketh. And I'm sure there will be other translations as we go along. But the basic idea that it begins with, before it even starts, there's a little poem that I may not remember the whole thing, but mind is the maker and man is mind, and taking what he wills brings forth 1,000 joys and 1,000 ills. We think in secret and it comes to pass. Environment is our looking glass. This is the little poem. The idea that we think, we are thinking beings. We are connected to that level of power. And out of that, whatever you perceive as environment is essentially the creation of this power and of this, we don't think in isolation. So, the coming together of our various thought streams is something that creates what we describe as the real world. And of course, those realities differ according to where we live. But multi-dimensional beings is this first seed. And beyond thought, there is this realm that is of great importance to many, which you might describe as the realm of spirit. The principle that, again, it associates itself with the child that is born. The soul and the body come together, spend some time together in this world, variety of experiences, with the soul making its various attempts to be heard, to influence our behaviors. You hear about the still small voice, every spiritual tradition. And then the parting of the ways. The body dissolves. All of the components in the body dissolve and are spread around into the greater environment. The soul retreats. In this ageless wisdom tradition, the idea is that there is a reincarnation process. So having garnered what it can, it retreats and comes back to try again. They say the old soul takes the road again. So this is this process. Multi-dimensionality is this first important idea that if you can kind of think your way into it, there's something there for you. The second one would be, the way I would put it is, there is no empty space. Another way of saying it might be that there is omnipresent intelligence. That the space we inhabit is not void, it's not empty. When we think of space, we tend to think of open, empty areas, but the room we're sitting in, there is such a thing as the electromagnetic spectrum. And so, there are microwaves, there are X-rays, there are cosmic rays, passing through this room, passing through our bodies, passing through our brains at every given moment. And the most tangible example, probably everyone in here, and hopefully all of you have done this, where you have a cell phone, but you shut it off. Everybody's got a cell phone. And if anybody happens to be calling, those signals surround us. Right? Proof, right? I should say I requested them to push that button at that moment. No, I wish. But no, we're surrounded, and to give further proof. So these things are around us at every moment. At a deeper level, though, this ageless wisdom tradition would assert that and more. You cannot find a spiritual tradition that does not have its own system of hierarchies of intelligence. And so you have, the angels, the archangels, the cherubim, the seraphim, the elementals, the little nature spirits, You pick your tradition, and every one of them talks about surrounding intelligence that some of them do not interact with humanity directly. But others, there are descriptions about how we might interact with some of these higher intelligences in terms of our attempts to live in this world, particularly for those who are involved in healing, for instance. A great man in the Theosophical world, a man by the name of Jeffrey Hodson, wrote a book about the devas, the angels, the angelic kingdom was the name of the book. But devas is the word used in India, and the idea that for people who are doing healing work, the sort of ritualized or formalized call upon the angels of the healing art to come to our aid and pour forth your healing power into, and how this magnifies this process of energetic transfer and stabilizing of the energetic process within people. So there is no empty space. We are surrounded by intelligence at every moment. And the reason why we tend to remain ignorant is we have trained ourselves largely to respond to much coarser inputs. The noises in the street. If we hear something out there, we'll pay attention, we'll respond appropriately. But if we have some sort of coincidence that occurs around us, we might completely overlook it. Some sort of indication to place our attention in a different way is something that we have the capacity to intelligently cultivate. But it begins with the idea that you learn to recognize that we are in an environment permeated with intelligence. So that's the second thing, no empty space, omnipresent intelligence. The third I would describe as self-responsibility. This is this third seed that this theosophical presentation of the ageless wisdom was trying to get across. That each one of us is self-responsible. There's a little book called The Idol of the White Lotus. It's a lovely story. Short book, too. They have it here. But at the end of that, there is this statement that takes place of what's called the three truths. And one of those truths is about this self-responsibility. It says, each man, of course, excuse them for the language of that century, each man is his own absolute lawgiver. That's a powerful thing to say. The dispenser of glory or gloom to himself, the decreer of his life, his reward, and his punishment. So basically, you're the ship, you're the captain, you're the crew. You run aground, don't blame it on the wind. Basically, this is the idea that it has tried to put forward. And, another idea that is powerful as an idea, but all of these things are useless. If it just remains in the realm of ideas and concepts, then it's nice to hear. It might have some occasional elevation that we experience, but you have to experiment. The fact that you hear it is just not good enough. It requires verification or confirmation that it's not true. Either way, you win, but it's something that requires our experimentation, and we've got the best possible laboratory to do that, which is the laboratory of our own bodies, of our own minds, of our own consciousness. we can experiment with these ideas, with these seeds. Is it true that my thoughts and my behaviors have some influence on my environment? You're probably not going to wake up one morning and have a great thought and, nature will suddenly heal itself from our extended abuse. But maybe start a little smaller. Maybe start with the environment in your own home. If I wake up and I find, my normal habit is to vent all of the things that other people aren't doing right around me, take a day to take a break and see if that changes things. It might. But if it doesn't, you'll know I was wrong. That's valuable. So these things require you hear it, you nod your head or you shake your head, whichever it is, but then absent the contribution of our own activity, it's just somebody else's idea. So self-responsibility. The fourth of these seeds could be expressed as the existence or the fact of spiritual evolution. Spiritual evolution literally means unfoldment. So we're familiar, most of us, if we didn't completely sleep through, high school and Darwin's presentation of evolution. We're familiar with evolution in terms of its the way that it's described in scientific text, which has proven itself to be quite accurate along many lines. But the thing that is different is this. Darwin's evolution speaks about the survival of the fittest and the natural selection. So basically, it's something that describes how the forms that we witness in the biological world, what it is that shapes their being and their appearance. That over time, there is this natural selection process, which makes sure that certain forms continue, others cease to, but it's related to form. When we talk about spiritual evolution, again, it steps outside of the defined boundaries of science as practiced. Not of science, but science as practiced. Because it talks about consciousness. The idea of spiritual evolution is that within each one of us, there are potentials that have yet to be revealed, but which can and will be revealed, again, to the extent that we provide the necessary conditions. Given the long stretch of time, humanity as a whole will elevate in consciousness. You talk about beyond millennia, that will happen. Just because the way things work, even for us as individuals, is that, if you see something enough, these people talk about how, they're always banging their head against the wall, and then they realize how good it feels when they stop. This is kind of like a thumbnail description of human behavior in many avenues, whether you choose wars, climate change, desertification, economic imbalance, pick your field. We have been banging our heads against this same wall throughout much of human history. And ultimately, you get to a point where enough is enough. So that's one way of evolving. Another way is to make conscious choices. Again, self-responsibility. That I am going to pursue an avenue that first adds to my knowledge of myself, because what you start to find is that what you discover about yourself is common to all others. You're not unique. in anything except your appearance, the place you were born, the family we're born. That's our uniqueness. But as human beings, there isn't a human being alive that isn't trying to find some pathway to the experience of happiness. Everybody. That's common. There isn't a human being alive who doesn't at some point have some, at least brief glimmer that the possibilities and the potentials within them far exceed their current expression. Everybody has that, even if it's just as like a wish for the future, or if I were king, that kind of thinking. So that's universal. And that universal is based on, from the ageless wisdom perspective, this assertion that each one of us is ensouled by spirit. That the human being is highest spirit, lowest matter, linked by mind. That the mind's activity is what connects the highest with the most material. And so this commitment to the cultivation of this mind that can actually touch on light itself, as well as touch on deepest matter, that's where we do the work. And so spiritual evolution, it's something that would be said to be endless. Right now we find ourselves at a certain stage. The brain has a certain activity, the scope of our awareness has a certain range, but it's something that can be extended enormously. And it's the idea that you find in spiritual traditions of the world that there are such things as masters of the wisdom. There are such things as Buddhas. There are such things as messiahs. There are those, outliers of human experience that somehow their perspective and their capacity is so grand, so much extended beyond the narrow confines we find ourselves, that they are the indicators, if you believe what they tell you, that they're the indicators of your future. The things I do, greater things shall you do. Buddha, the Buddha nature that is inherent in each and every person. Krishna, the inner ruler, immortal, living in the heart of all beings. That's who Krishna said he was. So, if you believe that, then, this is the possibility for this unfoldment. And, we begin where we are. We're not going to be Krishna and Buddha because we just heard a talk or we read a book or we sat down and crossed our eyes and breathed for a few minutes. But you do that regularly. You do that with some consistency. You find some sort of level of seeing opening. You pursue it. Over time, you're not the person who first sat down. And you know it. And more importantly, others around you know it. And this is kind of the hope for, in many ways, it's the hope for the world. All right, so the fifth thing, and probably the most important of the seeds. So here are the seeds again, because I don't want to forget. Multidimensionality, number one. No empty space, number two. Self-responsibility, number three. The last thing I said, number four. That was just a test, by the way. How could I forget? Even though I'm gray, I don't forget. Spiritual evolution, yes. And then the last and the most important. If I was being completely straightforward, I probably would have said this one first, because it's preeminent, primary, number one. This ageless wisdom presentation that you find in the theosophical world, Theosophy, the number one thing that is of importance is the idea, again, it begins as an idea of oneness, unity. In the objects of the Theosophical Society, the first one is to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity. Again, forgive the language of the 1800s. The universal kinship of the human family without regard to race, caste, creed, sex, color. Without regard to any of the artificial barriers that we impose on each other. Your color's a little different than mine. I've got a judgment there. Your body shape is a little bit different. I've got a judgment there. And that judgment, accepted by many, becomes the culture. It becomes the law. It becomes what we would describe as contemporary history. So, unity, oneness as the central fact of all existence. You could say interconnection. You could say interdependence. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist meditation master and peace advocate, he used an expression I like very much, which he used to talk about interbeing. Interbeing. That what we regard as separate individual identities and selves, first of all, is an impossibility. It just doesn't, it's not even scientifically correct. The idea that we are all individual, divided from one another. There was, I think of this as someone who had just much too much time on his hands, but it was a fellow who was a mathematician, and he did the computation of how many of, I think when he was doing it, he was trying to figure out how many of the atoms that were in the body of William Shakespeare are in his body. Yeah, it sounds ridiculous. Like I say, he had way too much time, but he was a mathematician. And so, you compute the number of atoms in the earth. You compute the number of atoms in William Shakespeare. You compute, the degradation of the body and the passing of it in many ways. He came up with a figure. And the figure was 6 billion, and it was correlated, it was corroborated, 6 billion atoms from William Shakespeare were in his body, likewise in ours. So before you think, though, that there's a better ending to Hamlet that you could write, 6 billion atoms in our bodies is a grain of sand on the beach. That's about what that accounts for. It's there, be proud, but it's not doing anything for you because it is so minuscule. And as a corrective, Buddha, there's 6 billion there too, but also Hitler, Pol Pot, all the different other people. That's just the way, that's the way of the world. It's a constant recycling of all of the physical matter that there is in existence. So we are not, the idea of separateness is, it's something that is continually reconfirmed. Because, for instance, I'm standing here and I'm talking. I'm not sitting there and, when I speak, you're not speaking. If I clap my hands now, your hands are not clapping. So everything confirms to us that we're separate, clearly. Someone smiles, I'm not smiling, we're separate. But on the physical level, even on that level, we function together. So this idea of oneness, of unity, and of the possibility for this as an actual experience is what's really important. If you ever take any of the time to read or to hear some of the things that the various mystics in history have had to say, all of it it's strange sounding often, because they speak from a level where, this whole separateness is, they're not functioning in that level. One of the greatest, well, the most read poet in the Western world is a guy born in the 15th century in Afghanistan, Jalaluddin Rumi. You all see his quotes. If you have TikTok or anything else, you're getting them probably every day. He write poems. He wrote thousands of them. One of the many things relates to this. He says, out beyond ideas of right and wrong, there's a field. I will meet you there. Then he says, when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to speak about. Ideas, language, even the words each other make no sense. It's not something that you would take as an analytical subject, but it's an expression trying to use words and imagery to convey something of this experience of oneness, absence of boundaries, non-interference of ideas, non-division by language. These are things that he tries to communicate. So oneness. All right, let me just kind of tie these things together. So we're talking about these 5 seeds. And when we talk about these 5 seeds, it's good to hear. It might be helpful for us to go out and think about. But in many ways, to some degree, we really don't have a lot of time for certain things. I mean, in the sense that we all live in a world that is clearly facing issues. We have issues, we have challenges. And to come and sit for a talk and to think about it is good, but what does it do for this moment that we're living in? And I think that's something that is of importance. So, multidimensionality, all of these different things. Multidimensionality speaks to something that is a latent power within us. Any one of us, you may not be able to make decisions that are going to affect the global economy because you say so, but you are able to sit and to think. You are able to direct your thought. You are able to heal with thought. You are able to benefit, improve where you are just through the access to shared fields of emotion, of thought. Anyone who's had the experience of sitting next to someone, either someone who is highly uplifted, you sit around them for a while, even if you don't say a word, you feel your energy rise. Similarly, if you're around someone who is depressed, if you're not very careful, you'll walk away drained, because that's the nature of the condition. It's energy consumptive. But each one of us is continually affecting ourselves and our broader environment, because we're multidimensional beings sharing fields in the multidimensional universe. No empty space. Each one of us equally has, whether we think of it consciously or not, we are continually drawing to ourselves unseen forces that have an impact. Each one of us, when we walk around, we carry a crowd with us that's been developed by our thinking, right or wrong. And there's an expression that says we are continually peopling our current in space, which is something I very much like that way of putting it. From moment to moment, you think a thought, you're attracting something that resonates with that thought. We kind of believe perhaps that it ends with the physical world. you put some honey out on your back porch or outside, and bees, butterfly, other things will be attracted to it. You put a pile of garbage, a whole different type of being and entity is drawn to that. And we think it ends with the physical world. Why would it? As it is below, so it's the same above. The thoughts that we think are highly attractive to forces that can magnify that. So why not use it for the good? So no empty thought. No empty space. Self-choice, self-responsibility, you get that by this point. I think I've belabored that point a little bit too much. We have that power, and we need to use it. And then spiritual evolution, that's something that will occur. The fact that we are focusing the capacities that we have come to understand on this process of experiencing and expressing our interconnection, our oneness, our interdependence. That's something where it's the food for the evolution of the soul. So it's a good thing to have moments where we can consider some of these things. Maybe it's something where some aspect of it might take root, it might be of use. But again, probably there isn't anyone who is so removed that we're not aware that this is an important point in our human history. And the ways that the human family has conducted itself, we've become a force of nature, and we are driving the natural world into a whole variety of changes, just by virtue of our pattern of consuming all that there is for the benefit of one of the populations on the planet, which is the human family. Damn the rest. So this is a moment where we can utilize these things. It would be a mistake to think that hearing about a spiritual path or studying a spiritual direction can ever replace putting one foot in front of the other. So, that's something that is the challenge to each of us. But I'm thankful that you've taken the time for us to share a moment together and consider something that, again, to me at least, is important. So thank you. Thank you all.